A single dad helping a woman with a flat tire never expected her to be a billionaire CEO in disguise, running from a life he couldn't imagine. What started with a simple act of kindness on a desolate road would unravel a story of two worlds colliding, forcing them both to decide what's worth holding on to when everything is on the line. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. The silence of the road was the first thing Liam noticed. Not the quiet kind, but the heavy, empty kind that pressed in on all sides, broken only by the hum of his worn minivan tires on cracked asphalt. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes finding his daughter Maya in the back seat, her head leaning against the window, a small stuffed fox clutched in her arms. She was humming a tuneless song, lost in her own world, a small island of warmth in the vast, indifferent landscape of rural Oregon. They were heading toward a new start, or at least that's what he told himself. A small town called Havenwood, a job at a local garage that paid just enough, a tiny apartment with a leaky faucet he'd already planned on fixing. It wasn't a step up, but it was a step away. Away from the city that held too many ghosts, the apartment that echoed with a laugh he'd never hear again, the pity in the eyes of friends who didn't know what to say anymore. He was a man running on fumes, both in his gas tank and in his soul, but he had Maya, and that was the one engine he refused to let stall. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a map folded messily on the passenger seat beside him. He wasn't lost, not geographically, but the feeling lingered, a dull ache behind his ribs. He was a mechanic by trade, a man who understood the logic of engines, the certainty of a well-oiled machine. Life, however, had proven to be anything but logical. It was messy, unpredictable, and prone to breaking down at the worst possible moments. He just prayed this move, this last-ditch effort for something resembling stability, wouldn't be another breakdown. As he rounded a long, sweeping curve, the monotony was broken by a sleek, dark sedan pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking in a slow, rhythmic pulse against the graying sky. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on a road like this. Too clean, too low to the ground, an animal from a different ecosystem. It looked like it had been dropped from the sky and had landed with a quiet, expensive sigh of defeat. He saw a figure standing beside it, a woman, her back to him as she stared at the flat back tire. He slowed the van, a familiar instinct kicking in. He didn't have time for this, but his father's voice echoed in his head, a memory worn smooth with time. "You don't pass by someone stranded, son. The world's already cold enough." He pulled over a few yards behind her, the minivan's engine rattling in protest before he shut it off. Maya sat up, her humming ceasing. "What's wrong, Daddy?" He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Someone's got a flat. Just going to see if they need a hand." He stepped out into the biting wind, his worn work boots crunching on the gravel. He was just a man with a toolbox and a promise to keep, never imagining that the woman standing by that disabled car owned the company that built it, and that this simple act of kindness was about to change the trajectory of his entire life. Isabella Vance stared at the shredded tire as if it had personally betrayed her, which, in a way, it had. For 3 weeks, she had been blissfully, intentionally invisible. She'd swapped her tailored suits for jeans, her penthouse for anonymous hotel rooms, and her Namia name that opened boardroom doors and graced magazine covers for the quiet relief of being no one. She was just a woman driving west, chasing a silence she hadn't felt in years. And now, this. A flat tire on a desolate stretch of highway with no cell service and a sky-threatening rain. The car, a prototype from her own company's new line, was supposed to be flawless. It was a machine of precision and power, a symbol of the very world she was trying to outrun. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She kicked the hubcap lightly, a gesture of frustration that felt childish and deeply satisfying. She didn't know how to change a tire. Her father had made sure she knew how to read a balance sheet and command a room, but practical skills, the kind that got your hands dirty, were deemed unnecessary. Someone else always handled things. That was the problem. Her entire life had been handled by someone else. She heard the crunch of gravel behind her and tensed, her hand instinctively going to the pepper spray on her keychain. A beat-up, faded blue minivan had pulled over. A man was getting out. He wasn't large or threatening, just tall and lean, with a weary set to his shoulders that spoke of long miles. He wore a flannel jacket that had seen better days and work boots that were scuffed and stained. He moved with a purpose that wasn't aggressive, just steady. "Everything all right?" he called out, his voice calm, carrying easily on the wind. Isabella kept her distance, her guard firmly in place. "Just a flat tire," she said, her tone cooler than she intended. He nodded, his eyes scanning the car, then the tire. "Looks like more than a flat. Looks like it gave up completely." He walked closer, stopping a respectful few feet away. His face was all sharp angles and quiet exhaustion, but his eyes were kind. She hated that she noticed. "You got a spare?" he asked. She gestured vaguely to the trunk. "I think so. It's a rental." It was a lie, but it was an easy one. It explained the car without explaining her. He didn't seem to care either way. "All right, pop the trunk. I've got a jack in my van that'll work better than the factory one." She hesitated. In her world, help always came with a price, a hidden clause, an expectation. This man, with his tired eyes and old minivan, seemed to want nothing. That in itself was suspicious. But she was stranded, and he was offering a solution. She pressed the button on her key fob, and the trunk lifted with a soft, hydraulic whoosh. He didn't even blink at the expensive sound. He just nodded and went to his van, returning a moment later with a heavy-duty jack and a tire iron. He knelt by the wheel, his movements efficient and sure. He was a man who knew how to fix things. Isabella just stood there, watching him, feeling the unfamiliar, uncomfortable weight of being the one who needed saving. Liam worked in silence, his hands moving with the practiced grace of a man who had spent a lifetime turning bolts and wrestling with stubborn lug nuts. The air was cold, but a familiar warmth spread through his muscles as he worked. This was a language he understood: metal, rubber, leverage. It was simple, honest work. There were no hidden meanings, no emotional complexities. A tire was either flat or it wasn't. A bolt was either tight or it was loose. He could feel the woman's eyes on him, a steady, watchful gaze. He didn't look up. He focused on the task, on the rhythmic turn of the tire iron, the groan of the metal as the lug nuts broke free. From his van, Maya watched through the window, her small face a mixture of curiosity and patience. He'd taught her to be wary of strangers, but he'd also taught her that kindness wasn't a weakness. It was a choice, and he'd always choose to help. He lowered the shredded tire to the ground and rolled the compact spare into place. It was smaller, flimsier, but it would get her to the next town. As he tightened the last lug nut, he finally glanced up at her. She was hugging herself against the wind, her dark hair whipping around a face that was more than just pretty. It was composed, guarded, like a fortress built to withstand a long siege. "You should be good to go," he said, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. "Just don't go much over 50 on this thing." "It's not meant for the highway." She nodded, her gaze flickering from his face to his hands, which were calloused and stained with the faint, permanent shadow of grease. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was different now, softer. "You have no idea how much you just saved me." She reached into her purse, a sleek leather thing that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and pulled out a wallet. She extracted a thick fold of bills. "Please, let me pay you for your time." She held out 2 $100 bills. Liam looked at the money, then back at her face. He gave a small, humorless laugh and shook his head. "No thanks." Isabella blinked, surprised. "I insist. You spent half an hour in the cold." "You have a daughter waiting." "I do," he said, his eyes flicking back to the van where Maya was now waving. He waved back. "And I want her to know that you don't put a price on helping someone who's stuck. It's just what you do." He tucked the rag back in his pocket and picked up his jack. "You have a safe drive, all right?" Isabella stood there, the money still in her hand, utterly speechless. She had offered payment as a transaction, a way to close the loop, to maintain the comfortable distance of strangers. He had rejected it not out of pride, but out of principle. In her world, everything had a price. His kindness, it seemed, was priceless. He was already walking back to his van, his shoulders squared against the wind, a man who had nothing and yet seemed to possess something she had long forgotten existed. She slowly folded the bills and put them back in her wallet, her mind reeling. She didn't know his name, where he was from, or where he was going. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready for him to disappear. Liam settled back into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of old upholstery and stale coffee, a comforting anchor after the brief, strange encounter. He turned the key, and the van rumbled to life. In the rearview mirror, he saw the sleek sedan still parked on the shoulder, the woman standing beside it, watching them. "Was she nice, Daddy?" Maya asked, her voice pulling him back from his thoughts. "Yeah, kiddo, she was just fine," he said, pulling back onto the empty highway. He drove, his mind replaying the scene. The expensive car, the woman's guarded eyes, the way she'd offered him money, as if it were the only language she knew how to speak. He'd met people like her before, people who lived behind walls of wealth, so insulated from the world that a simple act of human decency felt like a service to be paid for. He wasn't angry, just sad for her. There was a loneliness in her eyes that money couldn't fix. He pushed the thought away. It wasn't his problem. He had enough of his own. He had to get to Havenwood, get the keys to the apartment, and start a job that was his last real shot at keeping them afloat. He couldn't afford to get distracted by mysterious women on the side of the road. But as the miles stretched on, her image lingered. The way the wind caught her dark hair, the slight tremor in her hand when she'd offered the cash, the look of genuine shock on her face when he'd refused. He told himself it was nothing, a fleeting moment, 2 ships passing in the gray afternoon. He'd never see her again. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, a small, invisible gear clicking into a place it hadn't been before. Meanwhile, Isabella climbed back into her car, the scent of leather and newness feeling alien and sterile after the raw, cold air outside. She started the engine, the purr of the Vate, a quiet, powerful contrast to the rattling minivan that had just driven away. She watched it shrink in her rearview mirror until it was just a blue speck against the horizon. She should have kept driving. Her plan was to go to the coast, to find a small, forgotten town where no one knew the name Vance, and just be. But the man's face was imprinted on her mind. His refusal of her money wasn't an insult, it was a revelation. It was a crack in the cynical armor she had built around her heart. He hadn't wanted her money, he hadn't wanted anything, he had just helped. She pulled out her phone, a sleek, custom-made device with encrypted channels and a direct line to her security team. She could have him identified in minutes. His name, his history, his destination. It would be easy. But that felt like a violation. It felt like reverting to the person she was trying to escape, the one who used resources and power to get what she wanted. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She made a decision based on a gut feeling. She put the car in drive, pulled onto the highway, and followed the blue speck. She didn't know why. She just knew that for the first time in a very long time, she had met someone who felt real, and she wasn't ready to let that feeling go. The sign for Havenwood appeared like a welcome mirage after another hour of driving. Population 1, 284, it read, the paint slightly chipped at the edges. Liam let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They'd made it. The town was nestled in a valley, a collection of brick buildings, tall pine trees, and houses with smoking chimneys. It was the quintessential small town, the kind you saw in movies, a place where everyone likely knew everyone else's business. For Liam, that felt both comforting and terrifying. He found the garage easily, a 2-bay shop with a faded sign that read, Miller's Auto Repair. A stout, graying man named Frank Miller met him at the door, his handshake firm, his eyes kind. "Liam, good to have you," he said, his voice a low rumble. The apartment's ready for you. Keys under the mat." "It's not much, but it's clean." Liam nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you, Frank. I appreciate the chance." "Don't thank me yet," Frank chuckled. "Wait till you see the state of the transmission on that '98 pickup in Bay 2. The apartment was above the garage, accessed by a rickety set of wooden stairs. It was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but it was warm, and the view from the window looked out over the town square. It smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. "We're home," Liam said softly, setting their 2 duffel bags on the floor. Maya immediately ran to the window. "Look, Daddy, there's a bookstore." Her excitement was a balm to his weary soul. This was why he did it. For her, for these small moments of joy. He started to unpack, putting their few possessions away, trying to turn the small space into a home. A framed photo of his late wife, Sarah, went on the small nightstand. A stack of Maya's favorite books went on the windowsill. The worn teddy bear she couldn't sleep without was placed in the center of her new bed. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. It was a start. He stood in the middle of the living room, hands on his hips, taking it all in. The weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it felt a little lighter. Maybe here, in this quiet town, they could finally find some peace. Maybe here, he could finally stop running and start building again. A life, a home, a future. It was a fragile hope, but it was all he had. Isabella parked her sedan on a side street, 2 blocks from the town square, hidden in the shadow of a large oak tree. She watched from a distance as the blue minivan pulled up to the garage. She saw the man Liam, Frank had called him, get out and shake hands with the older mechanic. She saw the little girl, Maya, point excitedly at a nearby building. She watched them climb the stairs to the apartment above the shop, and a strange ache settled in her chest. It was a life so different from her own it might as well have been on another planet. Humble, simple, contained. He lived where he worked. His world was small, tangible. He could probably see his whole life from that one window. Her world was a sprawling, disconnected map of boardrooms, airports, and sterile hotel suites. She had a dozen properties she called home, but none of them felt like it. She had spent her entire adult life accumulating things: wealth, power, influence, only to realize she had accumulated nothing that truly mattered. She leaned her head back against the leather headrest, the new car smell suddenly cloying. What was she doing here? Spying on a stranger? This was insane. She was Isabella Vance, CEO of Vance Automotive, one of the most powerful women in the industry. She had a multi-billion-dollar company to run, a board to answer to, a legacy to uphold. And she was hiding in her car in a town with one stoplight, obsessing over a man who had changed her tire and refused $200. It was pathetic. She should leave. Drive to the coast as planned, find a beach, and walk until she couldn't feel her legs. That would be the logical, sensible thing to do. But logic had flown out the window the moment he'd smiled, that tired, gentle smile. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a man who operated on a currency she didn't possess. His integrity was a quiet, unshakable force, and she found herself drawn to it like a moth to a flame. She wasn't a fool. She knew a man like him would never fit into her world. And she certainly didn't fit into his. But for now, she didn't want to think about that. For now, she just wanted to watch, to exist in the same small town, to breathe the same crisp air. She just wanted to be near something that felt real, even if it was only for a little while. So she stayed, a silent observer in a high-tech car, a ghost from another world haunting the edges of a life she could never have. The first week in Havenwood was a blur of settling in. Liam fell into the rhythm of the garage, with an ease that surprised even him. Frank Miller was a good boss, fair and direct, a man who valued honest work over smooth talk. The work itself was familiar, grounding. Liam found a strange peace in the grease under his fingernails, the satisfying click of a socket wrench, the hum of a well-tuned engine. He was good at this. He was good at fixing what was broken. It was the things he couldn't fix that haunted him in the quiet hours. He and Maya established a new routine. Mornings started with pancakes if he wasn't too tired, followed by a short walk to the small elementary school at the edge of town. After school, she would do her homework in the garage's small, cluttered office, the scent of motor oil and the sound of his work, a familiar backdrop to her life. In the evenings, they'd eat dinner at the small table in their apartment, read books, and talk about their day. It was a simple, quiet life. But the weight of their finances was a constant, low-grade hum in the back of his mind. The job paid the bills, just barely. There was no room for error, no cushion for emergencies. A sick day, a broken appliance, an unexpected car repair, any of it, could send their fragile stability tumbling down. He tried not to let Maya see the worry in his eyes, but she was an observant child. She noticed when he ate a smaller portion at dinner, when he spent evenings hunched over a calculator and a stack of bills. She never said anything, but she would hug him a little tighter on those nights, as if she could somehow hold their world together with her small arms. He thought of the woman on the Clark road sometimes, a fleeting memory that would surface when he was working on a high-end car or when he saw a woman with dark hair walking down the street. He wondered where she'd gone, what kind of life she lived. It was a foolish thought, a distraction he couldn't afford. He had a daughter to raise, a life to build. There was no room in it for mysterious strangers and their inexplicable kindness. He had to focus on the tangible, the real. The rent, the groceries, the quiet, unwavering love of the little girl who was his entire world. Everything else was just noise. Isabella found a small cottage to rent on the outskirts of town, a place hidden by a thicket of pine trees and a winding gravel driveway. She paid in cash for 3 months up front, using a name she'd created for moments like this, Alice Cole. She told the landlord she was a writer on a sabbatical, seeking peace and quiet. It was a plausible lie, and in a town like Havenwood, people were inclined to believe the best of you. She spent her days exploring. She walked the quiet streets, browsed the shelves of the town's single bookstore, and drank coffee at the corner diner, listening to the gentle hum of local gossip. She learned the names of the shopkeepers, the mailman, the stray cat that slept in the sun on the steps of the town hall. For the first time in her life, she was anonymous, and it was intoxicating. But her anonymity was a carefully constructed facade. She still had a multi-billion-dollar empire to manage, and she did so from the quiet of her rented cottage, her laptop a glowing portal to a world of conference calls, market analyses, and high-stakes negotiations. She was living a double life, the quiet writer Alice by day, the formidable Isabella Vance by night. It was exhausting, but it was a price she was willing to pay. She saw him, of course. She couldn't avoid it in a town this small. She saw him walking Maya to school, their hands clasped together. She saw him at the grocery store, his brow furrowed as he compared the prices of cereal boxes. She saw him leaving the garage late at night, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. Each sighting was a small, sharp pang in her chest. He was so real, so grounded, so completely unaware of the invisible thread that now connected them. She made a point to stay away from the garage, to avoid any chance of an accidental encounter. She wasn't ready for that. She didn't know what she would say, what he would think. But she couldn't resist learning more about him. She learned from the waitress at the diner that he was a widower, that he was a hard worker, that he doted on his daughter. She learned from the librarian that Maya was a bright, sweet girl who loved books about animals. These small, second-hand details felt both precious and invasive. She was piecing together the life of a man who didn't even know she existed in his town, and the ethics of it were murky at best. One afternoon she saw Maya in the town square, sitting on a bench and sketching in a notebook. On a whim, Isabella walked into the bookstore and bought a beautiful hardcover edition of a classic children's book about a brave fox, a book she knew Maya would love. The next day, she left it on the bench in the town square, with a small, unsigned note tucked inside, for a fellow artist. She watched from a distance as Maya found it, her eyes widening with delight. It was a small, anonymous act of kindness, a way to connect without revealing herself. But as she watched Maya clutch the book to her chest, Isabella knew she was treading on dangerous ground. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was starting to interfere, and she had no idea where that path would lead. The book appeared on a Tuesday. Maya came home from the park behind the school, her face glowing, clutching a heavy, beautifully illustrated book. "Daddy, look what I found!" she exclaimed, holding it out for Liam to see. "Someone left it for me on the bench. There was a note." Liam took the book, his brow furrowed. It was a brand-new, expensive-looking edition. The note was simple, handwritten on a small piece of cardstock. For a fellow artist. There was no name. "That's really nice, honey," he said, though a seed of unease was planted in his mind. Havenwood was a kind town, but this felt different. It felt specific. He tried to brush it off, attributing it to the random generosity of a small community. But a few days later, something else happened. The garage's ancient, temperamental air compressor, which Frank had been complaining about for months, finally gave out with a spectacular sigh and a puff of smoke. A new one was an expense they couldn't afford right now, meaning they'd have to turn away tire jobs and other work. It was a serious blow. Liam spent the afternoon trying to patch it up, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. The next morning, when he and Frank arrived to open the shop, a brand-new, top-of-the-line air compressor was sitting on their doorstep. There was no invoice, no delivery slip, just a tag that read, "Paid, in full, from a friend of the garage." Frank was ecstatic, calling it a miracle. Liam was suspicious. Miracles didn't just show up on the doorstep of a struggling auto shop. Friends didn't spend thousands of dollars anonymously. He had a sinking feeling he knew who this friend was. The woman from the road. It had to be her. The thought was both flattering and deeply unsettling. Why? Why was she doing this? Was it pity? Was he some kind of charity project for a wealthy woman with a guilty conscience? His pride bristled at the thought. He was a man who paid his own way. He didn't want or need handouts. He confronted Frank about it. "We can't accept this, Frank. We don't know who it's from." Frank just clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, when God leaves a new air compressor on your doorstep, you don't ask for a receipt. You just say, 'Thank you,' and get back to work." Liam didn't argue, but the unease didn't go away. This invisible benefactor, this ghost of kindness, was starting to feel less like a guardian angel and more like a puppeteer, pulling strings from a distance. He didn't like the feeling of being watched, of being managed, even if it was for his own good. He liked to be in control of his own life, his own struggles. And someone was slowly, silently, taking that control away. Isabella knew she was playing with fire. The air compressor had been an impulse, a rash decision made late one night after overhearing Frank Miller complain about it at the diner. She'd made a few calls, moved some money through a charitable foundation she controlled, and ensured the delivery was completely untraceable. It was a simple solution to a simple problem, the kind of fix she was used to executing in the business world. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and she was crossing a line she had promised herself she wouldn't. She saw the change in him from a distance. He seemed more tense, his shoulders a little tighter, his gaze a little more guarded as he walked through town. She knew he suspected. A man like him, so fiercely self-reliant, would see the anonymous gift not as a blessing, but as a challenge to his dignity. She felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't meant to insult him. She had just wanted to help, to ease the burden she saw him carrying. But in her world, helping was simple. You identified a problem, and you threw resources at it. She was beginning to understand that in his world, it was far more complicated. She decided to pull back. No more anonymous gifts, no more interference. She would stick to her quiet life as Alice, the writer, and let him live his life without her invisible hand guiding it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One rainy afternoon, she was leaving the grocery store, juggling 2 paper bags and a faulty umbrella, when one of the bags, soaked from the downpour, gave way. Oranges and cans of soup scattered across the wet pavement, rolling under cars and into puddles. She let out a frustrated sigh and knelt to gather the runaway groceries, the cold rain seeping into the knees of her jeans. "Need a hand?" a voice said behind her. A voice she knew. Her head snapped up. It was him, Liam. He was standing there, holding a small, folded umbrella over her head, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite read. "You?" she breathed, her heart hammering in her chest. He gave a small, wry smile. "We've got to stop meeting like this." For a moment, they just stared at each other, the rain drumming a steady rhythm around them. The carefully constructed walls between their two worlds had just crumbled, and neither of them knew what to do next. The grocery store parking lot suddenly felt like the center of the universe. Isabella was frozen, kneeling on the wet asphalt, a can of crushed tomatoes in her hand, staring up at the man she had been secretly observing for weeks. Liam held the small umbrella over her, the rain dripping from its edges, creating a small, protected space just for them. "Here, let me help," he said, breaking the spell. He crouched down, his movements sure and steady, and began gathering the scattered items. He didn't ask questions. He didn't comment on the coincidence. He just helped, just like the first time. The carefully constructed walls between their two worlds had just crumbled. Liam knelt on the wet pavement, gathering cans of soup and runaway apples, his movements efficient and calm. Isabella, still flustered, tried to help, their hands brushing occasionally as they reached for the same item. Each touch was a small jolt of electricity, a reminder of the unspoken thing that hovered in the air between them. "I think that's all of it," he said, placing the last orange into a new, sturdier bag the store clerk had provided. He stood up, offering her a hand. She took it, his grip warm and firm, and he pulled her to her feet. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Again." He gave a small, noncommittal shrug. "Seems to be my civic duty to rescue your groceries." His tone was light, but his eyes were searching. He knew, or at least he suspected. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the quiet question lingering behind his gaze. "I'm Liam, by the way," he said, finally putting a name to the face she knew so well. "Isabella," she replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue in this context. It felt too big, too formal. In her head, she was still Alice, the quiet writer. "You're new in town, right?" he asked, walking with her toward her car. "Sort of," she said evasively. "I'm renting a cottage on the edge of town. Needed a quiet place to write." It was the lie she had prepared, the one that had worked on everyone else. But with Liam, it felt thin, transparent. He nodded slowly, not challenging her, but not fully accepting it either. "Havenwood's good for quiet," he said. They reached her car, and he loaded the groceries into the trunk for her. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the rain. "That book," he said suddenly, turning to face her. "The one for Maya. And the air compressor at the garage. That was you, wasn't it?" Isabella's heart sank. She had been caught. There was no point in denying it. She met his gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His expression tightened, not with anger, but with something that looked like disappointment. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "I didn't mean to," she started, her own voice faltering. "I just wanted to help." "I don't need your help," he said, and the words were quiet but sharp. "I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," she insisted, stepping closer. "Then what is it?" he challenged. "You show up out of nowhere, you follow me to this town, you start leaving anonymous gifts. What do you want, Isabella?" She didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense to him. How could she explain that in a life filled with everything, he and his daughter were the only things that felt real? How could she explain that his quiet integrity had become an anchor in her own chaotic world? She began, but the words wouldn't come. He just shook his head, a look of profound weariness settling over his features. "I've got to go. My daughter's waiting." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the rain, the weight of his question hanging in the air between them. She hadn't just been discovered. She had been dismissed. And it hurt more than she ever could have imagined. Liam drove home in a fog of anger and confusion. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. It wasn't pity, she'd said. Then what was it? Some kind of game? Was he an amusement for a bored, wealthy woman? A little project to make herself feel good? The thought made his stomach clench. He had worked his entire life to be self-sufficient, to stand on his own 2 feet, to provide for his daughter with his own 2 hands. His pride was one of the few things he had left, and she had trampled all over it with her casual, anonymous charity. When he got back to the apartment, Maya ran to greet him, her face bright with a smile. "Did you get the milk?" she asked. He forced a smile back, the anger receding in the face of her innocence. "I did, kiddo." But the interaction had unsettled him, thrown his quiet world off its axis. He had come to Havenwood for simplicity, for a life free of complications. And Isabella, with her secrets and her wealth, was the most complicated thing he had ever encountered. He tried to put her out of his mind, to focus on his work, on Maya. But she was a persistent ghost. He saw her car parked outside the diner. He saw her walking by the river. Each glimpse was a reminder of the lie that stood between them. He felt like he was being watched, analyzed, a specimen in a jar, and he hated it. A few days later, Frank called him into the office. "Got a weird call today," he said, scratching his head. "Some foundation wants to make a sizable donation to the garage. To sponsor a community outreach program, free car checkups for seniors, that sort of thing. They said they were acting on a tip from an anonymous, local benefactor." Liam's jaw tightened. "Isabella." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" "We've met," Liam said curtly. "Frank, we can't take her money." "Why the hell not?" Frank demanded. "It's a good thing, Liam. It'll help people." "It'll help the garage." "It's not right," Liam insisted. "It's charity. It's a handout." "It's a hand up," Frank shot back. "What is your problem? A rich woman wants to do something good for the town, and you're too proud to accept it?" Liam didn't have a good answer. All he knew was that every dollar she gave felt like another brick in the wall between them, a wall that separated her world of effortless solutions from his world of hard-earned survival. He felt like he was losing control, like his life was being subtly reshaped by a force he couldn't see or fight. And it scared him more than any overdue bill ever had. Isabella felt his rejection like a physical blow. She had miscalculated, badly. She had assumed her good intentions would be enough, that the what would matter more than the how. She had failed to understand that for a man like Liam, dignity was a currency more valuable than any dollar she could offer. She retreated to her cottage, the silence of the woods no longer a comfort, but a reflection of the new silence between them. She stopped her walks through town. She avoided the diner. She stayed hidden, nursing a wound that was entirely of her own making. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from her office, from her board, from the life she had abandoned. They wanted her back. They needed her leadership, her vision. A major acquisition was on the line, a deal she had been orchestrating for months before she left. Her absence was creating a power vacuum, and her rivals were circling. For weeks, she had ignored them, letting the calls go to voicemail, letting the emails pile up. But now, the silence of Havenwood was deafening, and the noise of her old life was a tempting distraction. At least in that world, she knew the rules. The transactions were clear. There were no bruised feelings, no wounded pride, just numbers on a balance sheet. Maybe it was time to go back. Maybe this whole escape had been a foolish, romantic fantasy. Maybe she didn't belong in a world of simple kindness and quiet integrity. Maybe she belonged in the sterile, high-stakes world she had built for herself. One evening, as she sat staring at her laptop, a draft of a press release announcing her return open on the screen, there was a soft knock on her door. Her heart leaped, a wild, irrational hope that it was him. She opened the door to find Maya standing on her porch, clutching her stuffed fox, her small face serious. "Hi," Maya said quietly. "My daddy doesn't know I'm here." Isabella knelt, her own problems momentarily forgotten. "What is it, sweetie? Are you okay?" Maya shook her head, her lower lip trembling. "My daddy's sad," she said, her voice a whisper. "He doesn't laugh anymore. Not since you stopped coming around." The words were a gut punch. "He says he's fine, but he's not. He just works all the time, and he looks tired, I think. I think he misses you." Isabella felt tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, honey." "Are you mad at him?" Maya asked, her eyes wide and searching. "No," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not mad at him." "Then why did you go away?" Before Isabella could answer, she heard Liam's frantic voice calling from the edge of the driveway. "Maya! Maya, where are you?" He appeared a moment later, his face, a mask of panic that melted into relief, then hardened into something else when he saw Isabella. He scooped Maya into his arms, holding her tight. "Don't you ever do that again," he said, his voice rough. "You scared me half to death." He looked at Isabella, his eyes a mixture of anger and something she couldn't name. "I'm sorry," she said softly. She just showed up. He didn't respond. He just turned and carried Maya back toward the road, his back a rigid wall of rejection. Isabella stood on her porch, her heart breaking, the press release on her laptop completely forgotten. She couldn't go back, not now. She had made a mess of things, and she had to find a way to fix it. Not with money, but with the one thing she had been so afraid to offer, the truth. Liam's heart was still pounding as he carried Maya home. The fear of losing her, even for a few minutes, had been a cold, sharp blade in his chest. But underneath the fear was a roiling current of other emotions. Anger at Isabella for being the source of this turmoil, and a deeper, more confusing anger at himself for caring so much. He put Maya to bed, his movements gentle, his voice soft, but his mind was a storm. She had said he was sad. Was it that obvious? He thought he'd been hiding it, burying it under long hours at the garage and forced smiles at the dinner table. But children see everything, and Maya had seen the truth. He was sad. He missed the barometer. Easy laughter Isabella had brought into their quiet lives. He missed the way her eyes would light up when Maya told a story. He missed the feeling of not being completely alone in the world. He hated that he missed her. He hated the power she had over him, the way her presence had so thoroughly upended his carefully controlled world. He sat in the dark of his living room, the glow of the streetlights painting long shadows on the floor. He had a choice to make. He could keep pushing her away, could retreat back into the safety of his solitude, and raise his daughter in a world free of her complicated influence. Or he could face the terrifying, undeniable truth. His life, as small and fragile as it was, had been better with her in it. The thought was terrifying. It meant vulnerability. It meant opening himself up to the possibility of more pain, more loss. He had built his walls so high for a reason. But Maya's words echoed in his head. He doesn't laugh anymore. Was he protecting her by shutting Isabella out, or was he just teaching her that when things get complicated, you run? Was he teaching her to live a life governed by fear? He thought of Sarah, of her boundless optimism, her belief that love was always worth the risk. She would have hated the man he was becoming, a man so afraid of getting hurt again that he was willing to sacrifice a chance at happiness. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet town. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he and Isabella could ever bridge the chasm between their two worlds. But he knew he couldn't keep living like this, in a half-life of sadness and fear. For Maya's sake, and for his own, he had to be brave enough to at least try. He had to be brave enough to let her in. The next morning, Liam woke with a sense of resolve he hadn't felt in weeks. He made Maya her favorite chocolate chip pancakes, and for the first time in a long time, his laughter was genuine. After dropping her off at school, he didn't go to the garage. Instead, he drove to the small, secluded cottage at the edge of town. He parked his van and walked up the gravel driveway, his heart a steady drum against his ribs. He knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping against the solid wood. Isabella opened it a moment later, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him. She was dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, but she also looked beautiful. "Liam?" she said, her voice soft. "Can I come in?" he asked. She nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. The cottage was cozy, filled with books and the faint scent of pine. A laptop sat open on a small wooden desk. He could see the world she came from in the sleek lines of the computer, but he could also see the woman she was trying to be in the simple, unpretentious space she had created. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, turning to face her. "I was scared, and I took it out on you." "You had every right to be," she said quietly. "Maya shouldn't have run off like that. And I shouldn't be a source of chaos in your life." "You are," he said, and she flinched. "But you're also something else." He took a breath. "I've been so focused on protecting Maya from getting hurt, I think I forgot that a life without risk isn't really a life at all. It's just waiting." He looked at her, his gaze direct and honest. "I don't know who you are, Isabella. Not really. I know you're wealthy, and I know you're running from something. But I also know that you're kind, and you make my daughter laugh. And you make me feel like I'm not just a mechanic, not just a widower, but a man." Tears welled in her eyes, and she didn't try to hide them. "I'm not the person you think I am," she whispered. "My life is a mess. It's complicated and demanding and lonely." "So is mine," he said with a small smile. "Maybe our messes fit together." He stepped closer, closing the small gap between them. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice low and firm. "I don't want your charity. I just want you. If you're willing to be here, in this town, in this life, with me." She looked up at him, a world of hope and fear in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because my world, it doesn't just go away. It will follow me here." "Then we'll face it together," he said. And he leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not about passion or romance, but about a deep, terrifying, and beautiful recognition. It was a kiss that tasted like a new beginning. Their new beginning was not a fairy tale. It was a slow, deliberate process of two worlds learning to coexist. Isabella didn't sell her company. She didn't abandon her responsibilities. Instead, she brought her world to Havenwood, but on her own terms. She ran Vance Automotive from the quiet of her cottage, replacing boardroom meetings with video conferences and high-powered lunches with sandwiches from the local diner, which she often shared with Liam at the garage. The town, for its part, was surprisingly accepting. Once the initial shock wore off, they treated Isabella not as a billionaire CEO, but as that nice writer who's dating Liam. They respected her privacy, and in return, she became a part of their community. She volunteered at the school library, helped organize the town's annual fall festival, and her foundation, now operating more transparently, provided the funding for a new playground and a much-needed renovation of the community center. Liam watched the transformation with a sense of awe. She handled her immense power with a grace and humility he had never seen before. She never used her wealth as a weapon or a shield. She simply used it to make things better, quietly, and without fanfare. Their relationship deepened, built on a foundation of shared meals, late-night talks, and the easy, comfortable silence of two people who had finally found a home in each other. He taught her how to change a tire. She taught him how to read the stock market. He took her to the county fair. She took him to a charity gala in the city, where he stood by her side in a rented tuxedo, looking completely out of place and utterly proud. There were challenges, of course. The media still occasionally descended on the town, sniffing for a story. Her family, at first, was disapproving, but they faced it all together. Liam's quiet strength anchored her, and her fierce loyalty protected him. They were an unlikely pair, the mechanic and the mogul. But their love was a real, tangible thing, a testament to the fact that home isn't a place but a person. One evening, as they sat on the porch of his small apartment, watching Maya chase fireflies in the twilight, Isabella leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think my life was about building an empire," she said softly. "But I was wrong. Liam wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "What's it about, then?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes on the little girl dancing in the yard. "It's about this," she said. "It's about building a life. A real one." And in the quiet of that small town, under a sky full of stars, they knew they had everything they would ever need. The garage had a new sign. It wasn't flashy, just clean, bold letters that read Havenwood Motors. Underneath, in smaller script, it said L. Morgan, I. Vance, Proprietors. It had been Isabella's idea, a partnership in the truest sense of the word. She'd invested in the business, not as a handout, but as a legitimate partner, bringing her business acumen to Liam's mechanical expertise. They expanded, adding a third bay and hiring 2 young mechanics from the local high school, giving them a chance to learn a trade. The garage became more than just a repair shop. It became a community hub, a place where people felt taken care of. Their life settled into a beautiful, ordinary rhythm. Isabella still ran her empire, but her priorities had shifted. She delegated more, traveled less. Her days were a strange, wonderful mix of international business calls and helping Maya with her math homework. She found she was just as happy negotiating a multi-million-dollar merger as she was watching Liam teach Maya how to properly check the oil in the minivan. Liam, in turn, found a new confidence. With the financial pressure eased, the perpetual worry that had shadowed his eyes began to fade. He was still the same quiet, steady man, but he laughed more easily, his smile reaching his eyes more often. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. And Maya was the center of their world, a bright, happy girl who had 2 parents who adored her. She had Isabella's sharp intellect and Liam's kind heart, a perfect fusion of their 2 worlds. One crisp autumn afternoon, the 3 of them were at the garage, closing up for the day. Maya was sweeping the floor, her movements serious and important. Isabella was wiping down the counter, and Liam was putting away his tools. The setting sun streamed through the open bay doors, casting a golden glow over everything. Liam paused, watching them, a wave of profound gratitude washing over him. He thought back to that day on the desolate road, a day when he was a man running on empty, his future, an uncertain, terrifying blank. He had stopped to help a stranger, a simple act of kindness with no expectation of reward, and that one small choice had led him here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. Isabella looked up and caught his eye, a soft smile on her face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He walked over to her, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek with his thumb. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice low and full of emotion, "that sometimes the things that are most broken lead you to exactly where you need to be." He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss filled with the quiet certainty of a love that had been tested and proven true. And Maya, seeing them, just smiled and kept on sweeping, the architect of their happiness, the heart of their home. Years later, a young journalist from a major magazine came to Havenwood to do a story on the Billionaire in the Boondocks. She was expecting a tale of scandal, of a powerful woman who had lost her mind and run away from her responsibilities. Instead, she found something else entirely. She found Isabella Vance, not in a power suit, but in jeans and a flour-dusted apron, judging a bake-off at the elementary school. She found Liam Morgan, not a kept man, but the respected owner of a thriving local business, his hands still stained with grease, his eyes full of quiet confidence. She found a town that had been subtly, beautifully transformed by a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine care. The journalist interviewed them on the porch of their now shared home, a simple, comfortable house with a big yard and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. "People don't understand it," the journalist said, her pen poised over her notebook. "How can you leave a world of so much power and influence for this?" Isabella looked at Liam, her hand finding his, their fingers lacing together in a familiar, easy gesture. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that the tabloids had never managed to capture. "You have it backwards," she said. I didn't leave a world of power. I left a world of noise. I came here and found something much more powerful." "And what's that?" the journalist asked, leaning forward. Isabella's gaze drifted to the yard, where a teenage Maya was now teaching a younger child how to throw a baseball. "Authenticity," Liam answered for her, his voice calm and steady. "And love." The journalist wrote her story, but it wasn't the one her editor had wanted. It was a story about how a flat tire on a lonely road had led to a life of unexpected joy. It was a story about how real strength isn't about what you own, but about what you're willing to give. It was a story about how the most valuable things in life, kindness, integrity, and love, are never for sale. And it was a story that, against all odds, gave a cynical world a little bit of hope. It proved that sometimes the most profound journeys don't take you across the globe, but just down a forgotten road to the one person who was waiting to help you find your way home. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the workshop, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A teenage Maya sat on a stool, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously cleaned a spark plug, her movements mirroring the ones her father had taught her years ago. Liam watched her from his desk, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. The garage, now expanded and bustling, was more than just a business. It was a legacy, a testament to a life rebuilt. Isabella walked in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, the scent cutting through the familiar smell of oil and metal. She leaned down and kissed the top of Maya's head, then handed a mug to Liam. She was no longer the guarded woman from the roadside. She was a woman at peace, her elegance now tempered with an easy, confident warmth. "Frank called," she said, settling on the edge of Liam's desk. "The Community Scholarship Fund is oversubscribed again. He says the whole town wants to thank you." Liam shook his head with a small smile. "It's not me, it's you. You're the one who started it." "I just provided the seed," she said softly. "You and this town provided the soil." They sat in comfortable silence, a silence born of years of shared understanding. It was a silence that held the memory of every struggle, every triumph, every quiet moment that had woven their lives together. Maya looked up from her work, a smudge of grease on her cheek. "Hey, Mom," she said, a teasing glint in her eye. "Dad was telling me about the first time you two met. Is it true you tried to pay him $200 to change a tire?" Isabella laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the workshop. "It's true," she admitted, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Liam. "And he turned me down flat. It was the most shocking and the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to me." "I was just doing what was right," Liam said, his voice laced with affection. "No," Isabella said, her expression softening. "You were doing what was kind. And you reminded me that there's a difference." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers tracing the calluses that had never quite faded. "You fixed more than my tire that day," she whispered. "You fixed me." Liam brought her hand to his lips, his heart full. They had come from 2 different worlds, 2 different lives, 2 different understandings of what it meant to be successful. But on a lonely stretch of road, they had found a common language. And in the years that followed, they had built a life not on compromise, but on a shared, unshakable foundation of love, integrity, and the simple, profound power of a helping hand. They had built a home. The wind that blew through Havenwood now carried the scent of autumn, of wood smoke, and damp earth. Liam stood on the porch of their home, the same house they'd built their life in, and watched as a familiar, sleek sedan, a new model from Vance Automotive, pulled into the driveway. Isabella got out, her briefcase in hand, her face lit with the tired but satisfied glow of a day well spent. She had just returned from a short trip to the city, a necessary visit to the headquarters she now ran with a renewed sense of purpose. He met her at the bottom of the steps, taking her bag and wrapping an arm around her waist. "Welcome home," he said, his voice a low rumble. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder with a sigh of contentment. "It's good to be home." They walked into the house, the warmth and the smell of roasting chicken enveloping them. "Maya," now a young woman on the verge of leaving for college, was at the stove, a cookbook propped open beside her. She looked up and grinned. "Just in time. I was about to burn the potatoes." The scene was a portrait of domesticity, a far cry from the life Isabella had once known, and a world away from the one Liam had been so desperately trying to hold together. It was a life they had built, not by erasing their pasts, but by integrating them. The mechanic's quiet strength and the CEO's visionary drive had found a perfect, harmonious balance. Later that evening, after dinner, as they sat by the fire, Isabella pulled a small, worn photograph from her wallet. It was a picture of a younger Liam, standing by her car on the side of that desolate road, a tire iron in his hand, a look of weary kindness on his face. "I still have this," she said, her voice soft. "My assistant took it from a distance that day. It was supposed to be for a security report. Proof of my unusual detour." Liam took the photo, his thumb brushing over the faded image. "I look exhausted," he chuckled. "You look like a hero," she said seriously. "You were the first person in years who saw me, not my name, not my bank account. You just saw a woman who was stuck. And you stopped." He looked at her, his love for her a steady, burning flame in his chest. "I'd stop for you every time," he said. And in that simple promise, the entire story of their lives was written. It was a story that proved that love isn't about finding someone who completes you, but about finding someone who inspires you to be the best version of yourself. And it all began, as the best stories often do, with an act of unexpected, unconditional kindness. The fire crackled, casting a warm, flickering light across the room. The house was quiet, filled with the comfortable peace of a life well lived. Maya had gone off to bed, and Liam and Isabella sat together on the couch, her feet tucked under his leg, a shared blanket draped over them. A gentle rain had begun to fall, tapping softly against the window panes. Isabella traced the patterns on the old hand-stitched quilt that covered them, a quilt Liam's grandmother had made. Each square told a story, a piece of a life, much like their own. "Do you ever miss it?" Liam asked quietly, his voice breaking the stillness. "The old life, the speed, the power, the city that never sleeps?" Isabella was silent for a moment, considering. She thought of the soaring glass towers, the adrenaline of the trading floor, the silent, deferential nod of her employees. It felt like a lifetime ago, a film she had once starred in. "Sometimes," she admitted, her honesty a testament to the trust between them, "I miss the challenge, the feeling of building something from nothing. But I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss the feeling of being a ghost in my own life." She turned to look at him, her eyes soft in the firelight. "What I have here," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is real. The noise of that world. It can't compete with the silence of this one. Not when this silence is filled with you." Liam's heart clenched with a familiar, overwhelming love. He had spent so many years believing he had nothing to offer, that his life was defined by what he had lost. But Isabella had shown him that his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his capacity for love, these were the most valuable assets a man could possess. He was not a project she had fixed, nor was she a damsel he had rescued. They were two broken people who had found a way to be whole, together. They had built a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a life filled with the quiet, everyday magic of a shared cup of coffee, a daughter's laughter, a helping hand offered without condition. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, a gesture of profound tenderness. "I love you, Isabella Vance," he whispered against her skin. "I love you, Liam Morgan," she whispered back. And as the rain fell on the roof of their home in Havenwood, they held each other. Two souls from different worlds who had found their common ground, their safe harbor, their forever. The journey had been long and unexpected, but they had finally, truly, arrived. The old garage stood as a landmark in Havenwood, a symbol of the town's enduring spirit. Havenwood Motors was more than a business. It was a promise of honest work, fair prices, and a helping hand. And at the heart of it all was the story of the mechanic and the CEO, a local legend that was told and retold with a fondness that never faded. On a bright, clear morning, a young couple, new to town, brought their sputtering car into the shop. A woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a warm, welcoming smile greeted them at the counter. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked. The husband, flustered, tried to explain the strange noise the engine was making. As he spoke, a man in a clean but well-worn work shirt came out from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. He listened patiently, then nodded. "Sounds like a timing belt issue. We can take a look." The couple, relieved, thanked them. As they waited in the small, comfortable office, they noticed the photos on the wall. A picture of the garage when it was just Miller's Auto. A photo of a little girl with a gap-toothed grin holding up a drawing. And a framed newspaper clipping with a headline that read, "The Kindness That Rebuilt a Town. The Story of Liam Morgan and Isabella Vance." The young wife looked from the photo to the couple running the shop. "Is that you?" she asked, her eyes wide. Isabella smiled. "A long time ago," she said. Liam came and stood beside her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "That was just the beginning of the story," he said, his gaze meeting his wife's. The young couple looked at each other, a sense of wonder dawning on them. They had come to a simple garage for a simple repair, but they had found something more. They had found the heart of a town, the legacy of a love story, and a living reminder that the greatest investments are not in stocks or companies, but in people, and that the most powerful force in the universe is, and always will be, a simple act of kindness on a lonely road. The porch swing creaked in a slow, rhythmic lullaby, the sound of familiar comfort in the quiet evening air. Liam and Isabella sat side by side, their hands intertwined, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The air was cool, and a shared blanket was draped across their laps. They had spent the day at the garage, a comfortable routine that never grew old. Maya had called from college, her voice bright with excitement as she described her latest engineering project. Their life was full, not with the frantic energy of Isabella's past, but with the deep, steady contentment of a love that had stood the test of time. "Remember that first day?" Isabella said softly, her head resting on Liam's shoulder. "On the road. I was so angry at that tire," Liam chuckled. "I remember you tried to give me $200. I thought you were crazy." "I was," she said, "crazy to think that money could solve everything. Crazy to think I was better off alone." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "You know, for years, my father told me that the most important thing in life was to build something that would last, something with your name on it. A legacy." "He wasn't wrong," Liam said. "Look at what you did with the company. With this town." "That's not the legacy I'm proudest of," she said, her voice a whisper. She tightened her grip on his hand. "This, us, the family we built, the home we made. That's my legacy, Liam, that's our legacy." He felt a familiar swell of emotion in his chest, a love so vast and deep it still sometimes took his breath away. He had been a man with nothing, and she had been a woman with everything. And together they had found that the only thing that truly mattered was the kindness they shared, the trust they had built, and the love that had grown in the most unlikely of places. He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that said everything words could not. As darkness settled over Havenwood, the porch swing continued its steady, quiet rhythm, a silent testament to a love story that was both impossibly grand and beautifully, perfectly simple. It was a story that would be whispered on the wind, a reminder that the greatest journeys are the ones that lead us home. The years had been kind. The lines around Liam's eyes were deeper now, etched by laughter and time. Isabella's hair had threads of silver that caught the light, but her smile was as radiant as ever. They stood on a hill overlooking Havenwood, the town lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. The garage, their garage, was a steady beacon in the center of it all. Maya was home for the holidays, a brilliant, compassionate young woman who was now a partner in Isabella's foundation, using her engineering skills to develop sustainable projects in underserved communities. She had the best of both of them: her mother's sharp, innovative mind and her father's steady, empathetic heart. "It's still beautiful," Isabella said, her voice soft in the crisp night air. "This view." "It's not the view," Liam said, pulling her closer. "It's who you share it with." They stood in silence for a long time, not needing to speak. Their life was a testament to the power of second chances, a story woven from the threads of two disparate lives that had found a way to become one. It hadn't always been easy. There had been storms, both literal and metaphorical. But they had weathered them together, their love a steady anchor in a changing world. A young couple walked past them on the path, their laughter echoing in the still night. The boy's car had broken down at the bottom of the hill, and a local mechanicone of the kids, Liam, had trained years ago, was already there, his flashlight, a small circle of light in the darkness. Liam and Isabella watched, a shared smile passing between them. The cycle of kindness continued. "He won't take any money for it," Isabella predicted. "Of course not," Liam said. "It's just what you do." They turned and walked back toward their home, their arms linked, their steps in perfect sync. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale with a dramatic, happy ending. It was something better. It was a real life, filled with the small, ordinary miracles of a love that was chosen, nurtured, and honored every single day. And it all started with a simple, unwavering belief that no one should be left stranded on the side of the road, and that a helping hand, offered with an open heart, could change the world. Or, at the very least, it could change a world for two. The old, faded blue minivan was long gone, but Liam still kept a photo of it in his wallet. It was a reminder of a time when his life was measured in miles and uncertainties, when hope was a fragile, flickering flame. He looked at it sometimes, when the garage was quiet and the world was still, and he remembered the man he used to be. A man running from ghosts, a man just trying to hold on. Isabella found him looking at it one evening, a quiet, nostalgic smile on his face. She came and sat beside him, her presence a familiar, comforting warmth. "Thinking about our first date?" she teased gently. He chuckled, folding the photo carefully and tucking it back into its worn leather sleeve. "Something like that. I was thinking about how scared I was. Scared of failing, scared of losing Maya, scared of being alone." "You were never alone," she said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." He looked at her, his love for her, a palpable force in the quiet room. "And you?" he said. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, without hesitation. "I was scared of being seen, of being found out, but mostly, I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't want me. I wanted the woman who didn't know how to change a tire but was brave enough to stand on the side of a lonely road and wait," he said. "I wanted the woman who saw a little girl's loneliness and left her a book. I wanted the woman who was more interested in my heart than my bank account. I fell in love with you, Isabella." The rest was just noise. They sat in a comfortable silence, the years falling away, leaving only the pure, unvarnished truth of their connection. Theirs was a love story that defied logic, a story that had been written in the language of kindness, trust, and unwavering support. It was a story that had turned a chance encounter into a lifetime, a broken-down car into a home, and two lonely souls into a family. And they knew, with a certainty that was as deep and steady as the earth beneath them, that it was the greatest story they would ever tell. The legacy of Liam and Isabella wasn't written in the annals of business magazines or on the plaques of charitable foundations. It was written in the lives of the people they had touched. It was in the young mechanic from Havenwood, who now ran his own successful shop, inspired by Liam's mentorship. It was in the community center that provided a safe haven for kids after school, funded by Isabella's quiet generosity. It was in the scholarship that sent Havenwood's brightest students to college, giving them opportunities they had only dreamed of. And most of all, it was in their daughter, Maya, who had taken the best of their two worlds and was now using it to make a real, tangible difference in the world. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they returned to the spot on the road where they had first met. The highway had been repaved, the trees were taller, but the vast, open sky was the same. They stood on the shoulder, the wind whipping around them, just as it had all those years ago. "It all started right here," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "With a flat tire and a man with kind eyes," Isabella said, her hand finding his. "I was so lost that day," she whispered. "I thought I was running away, but I was actually running toward something. Toward you." He pulled her close, his arms a familiar, protective circle around her. "We found each other," he said. "That's all that matters." They stood there for a long time, two people who had built a life on the simple, radical act of seeing the best in each other. Theirs was not a story of a prince and a pauper, but of two equals who had found in each other the missing pieces of their own souls. It was a testament to the enduring power of kindness, the quiet strength of integrity, and the extraordinary, life-changing magic of a love that was, and always would be, real. And as they stood on that lonely stretch of road, they were not a mechanic and a CEO. They were just Liam and Isabella, home at last. The sun was setting on another day in Havenwood, casting a warm, honey-colored light on the town. From the hill overlooking the valley, an old man and woman sat on a bench, their hands clasped together, their shoulders touching. They watched the lights of the town flicker on one by one, a familiar and comforting ritual. A young family walked by, their small child running ahead, chasing a stray leaf on the wind. The father called out to the child, his voice full of a gentle, protective love that was instantly recognizable. Liam smiled. "Some things never change," he said. Isabella leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank goodness for that," she replied. Their life was a quiet symphony of beautiful, ordinary moments. They had seen their daughter graduate, get married, and have children of her own. They had seen their town grow and prosper, a small, vibrant community built on the very principles they held so dear. They had weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, and held each other through the inevitable sorrows of a long life. They were a part of the fabric of Havenwood, their story a beloved piece of local folklore, a reminder that the most extraordinary things can happen in the most ordinary of places. As darkness fell, Liam helped Isabella to her feet, his movements slow and steady, his touch as gentle as it had been on the day they met. They walked back down the hill, their steps in sync, their shadows merging in the twilight. Their love story had no grand, dramatic finale. It simply continued, a quiet, enduring flame in the heart of a small town. It was a love that had been forged in kindness, tempered by hardship, and polished by the gentle, loving hand of time. And it was a love that would last forever, a timeless, beautiful legacy of a chance encounter on a lonely road.